of East Albion agricultural laborers. He wrote on historical agricultural credit conditions, so hence also Weber as one of the classics in agrarian sociology. There's Economy and Society, which I mentioned as the non-finished lifelong kind of project. I mentioned the certain divide between two different schools at the time of Weber's early life when it came to how to think about the social sciences as an academic discipline. And here Weber was very much influenced by one of the schools, and this is the German historical school around Gustav Schmoller and others. So these were historians who basically considered sociology or social sciences as an extension of historiography into the social sciences. So this German historical school posited, for instance, that there is a distinct cultural world of values which is different from the natural world. And that the study in sociology should be about studying historical singularities and not regularities. One important philosophical school that influenced Weber were the Neo-Kantians, like Rickert or Windelband. So after Kant's death at the beginning of the 19th century, there was a decline in thinking about Immanuel Kant and other German idealists. This was even reinforced with the death of Hegel in 1830. And these Neo-Kantians were new in the sense that towards the end of the 19th century, they rediscovered Kant, but they did so with, let's say, a certain update. So they tried to use the Kantian idea of a critique of reason, that is, in a way, an epistemological reflection on what truth conditions should hold for statements in the social sciences or in the sciences in general, in the social sciences in particular, and what kind of statements could be scientifically made and which ones couldn't be made because they would pertain to the realm of just metaphysics. So critique of reason being interpreted here as demarcating the space of knowledge and of statements that can reasonably be undertaken in science and in social science in particular. And the Neo-Kantians basically wrote their update on Kant against the backdrop of the natural sciences being much more developed and much more successful than at the time when Kant wrote his critique of pure reason in the 18th century. And one of the main ideas that Neo-Kantians had was that the epistemological apparatus that we use to observe the natural world is really distinct from observing the cultural world. So they didn't think about nature and culture as being ontologically divided, but about us using, let's say, a different vocabulary once we talk about the natural versus then the cultural world. And the particularity then of talking about the social world, the cultural world, the world of values, is then to not talk about it in terms of regularities that wouldn't make sense, but to go in the direction of what they called ideographic descriptions. So to describe the very singularity then of every event or social current. And they opposed this to what they call the normothetic approach in the sciences, which would consider a singular case just as a case of a more general phenomenon. So then a study would not be about let's say, the Russian Revolution, but it would be about the Russian Revolution as a case of revolutions more generally. So yeah, Neo-Kantians, but also the German historical school, argued then for a distinct social sciences, a little bit built on the idea of history as a discipline. And this is also mainly what Weber in his own methodological writings then followed, yeah, was strongly influenced by. So Max Weber, as you saw, started writing in the 1890s at a time when both Marx and Adam Smith had already published their works. Max Weber refers to Marx only implicitly when he writes about historic materialism in his works, just because at the time of writing, Marx was still somewhat of an outcast socialist figure at a time when the Social Democratic Party was still persecuted in the Prussia of the day, when any kind of reference to revolutionaries such as Marx would have been damaging to one's career. This being said, one of Weber's contemporaries and very close, let's say, allies in thought, Werner Sombart, popularized in a way the reception of Marx's writings, and he's also the one who can be credited with his term capitalism, as he wrote a three-volume book about modern capitalism, so the emergence of capitalism, early capitalism, classical and modern capitalism. So yeah, what is Weber's problem then with the historic materialism of Karl Marx? So remember this idea that it's basically the economic and perhaps even worse material sphere that determines everything pertaining to the superstructure of societies, such as ideologies, institutions, and so on. Well, one first problem Weber has is that he, as a, let's say, historically inclined social scientist, sees explanations as a more multi-causal phenomenon. He's against single cause kind of explanations. And he sees also social phenomena as much more historically contingent than the presupposed economic determinism attributed to Karl Marx. This is also important to keep in mind when interpreting Weber's Protestant ethic, where sometimes Weber is read as writing that Protestantism is the only cause for the rise of capitalism. I think, yeah, Weber's quote also here probably makes such an interpretation of the Protestant ethic less adequate. So I quote him here. I would like to protest the statement by one of the speakers that some one factor, be it technology or economy, can be the ultimate or true cause of another. If we look at the causal lines, we see them run at one time from technical to economic and political matters, at another from political to religious and economic ones, etc. There is no resting point. In my opinion, the view of historical materialism frequently espoused that the economic is, in some sense, the ultimate point in the chain of causes, is completely finished as a scientific proposition. Or, he says, at another instance, but it is, of course, not my aim to substitute for a one-sided materialistic and equally one-sided spiritualistic causal interpretation of culture and of history. So, in short, yeah, Weber rejects the idea of monocausalism, if you want, but he also brings up this idea that Marx's explanation could be faced with a problem of reverse causality. That is, it could have been also ideas that brought about economic conditions, and this is very much, I think, what Weber wanted to show in the Protestant ethics. So Weber does not only struggle with Marx, but he also criticizes the liberal view. Remember that the liberal anthropology presupposed the Homo economicus, that is, it starts from self-interested, rational actors, uses then the metaphor of the invisible hand to explain why social order emerges. Weber struggles with this interpretation anthropologically and points in a way to the historic specificity of Homo economicus. So he says that Homo economicus is not that universally available kind of model of human behavior. It may exist, right? Human action can be understood also with the help of the rational choice model. This is pure Weber also. It is one of the four action types that Weber distinguishes, but it is a socially constructed kind of economic rationality that only exists in certain contexts and societies. So yeah, he himself writes in the Protestant Ethics about how this social construction came about through the religious work ethic of the first generation Protestant capitalists, and how these kind of structures are then maintained in the second generations through what he refers to metaphorically as the iron cage of economic competition. We will get to this in a second. Weber is also against Adam Smith's classical explanation of, let's say, this very voluntaristic division of labor that just comes about naturally. And he puts an emphasis on the processes that use force, discipline, or re-education to put in place the modern work ethics. So traditional work ethics basically predetermined that if you have worked enough, if you have enough money or goods to satisfy your needs, you stop working. And the modern work ethics is one where people just continue working even though they have already fulfilled all their needs. And Weber argues that, let's say, the attractiveness or the pull of ever more money is not enough to explain why people engage in this kind of behavior in the division of labor. It is rather, just an education into that kind of discipline to continue working even though you can hardly work anymore. Or to quote Weber, a man does not by nature wish to earn more and more money, but simply to live as he is accustomed to live and to earn as much as is necessary for that purpose. Wherever modern capitalism has begun its work of increasing the productivity of human labor, by increasing its intensity, it has encountered the immensely stubborn resistance of this leading trade of pre-capitalistic labor, end of quote. When Weber refers here to men, he, in a patriarchal society, refers to men and women. We are still talking about a time when female labor, even child labor, was common in the factories of Europe at the time. What Weber here refers to is that it's basically push factors that are necessary in order to overcome the rigid sort of restrictions of a pre-capitalistic kind of work ethics. In order to motivate a sufficient number of people to do overwork during time of harvest, for instance, it wasn't enough to just set an incentive wage, as economists would put it nowadays, just to pay like a wage premium. It was necessary also to force people into thinking that overwork is necessary, or to simply use violence and to force them outright. For instance, in the institution of the poorhouses or the workhouses in Great Britain. Something that Marx also wrote about. All right, so this is basically just